This is Part 2, Episode 60. Cloud-chasing pirate ship flew for over a day and finally reached Surging River. The ship sailed up to the camp at the southern bank. Lizhu Prefecture had set up a massive military force along the river. The army had linked over 200 river camps and there were numerous soldiers and horses. When they reached here, a fierce battle had just ended and there were ships rampaging on the river surface. Some ships were already destroyed and thick smoke billowed out from the burning masts and deck. Corpses floated on the river surface. There were soldiers scattering fishing nets on the ship, fishing the corpses out. They then hooked the corpses with hooks and hung them at the aft of the ship, intending to bury them after dragging them to shore. Qin Mu opened his green heaven's eyes and looked towards the opposite shore of the river. There was a dilapidated city on the opposite shore and there were still sporadic fightings because there were still all kinds of rays bursting forth from divine arts. However, they were only skirmishes. It should be the army of Eternal Peace Empire eradicating the enemies in the city. Fan Yunxiao slowed down the ship and gradually descended down towards the camp. There was a soldier who flew up to the ship to inquire, and when he knew they were the scholars of Imperial College, he immediately waved his flag and made the archers below lower their bow and arrow. The ship gradually landed in the camp and Fan Yunxiao looked towards the sporadic fightings on the opposite shore with one black eye and one white eye. He then took a glance at Chen Wangyun, Yun Qiu, and the rest before shaking his head. "Old brother Qin, these scholars will only hold you back and not be of much help. With a battle of this scale, the few of you scholars are completely no help and it'll be difficult for you guys to survive. I'm leaving. When I find enough black iron and blueprint of the treasure ship, I'll come and find you again." After he was done, he made the bandits on the boat activate the furnace and flew away. Yun Qiu and the rest were demoralized and Chen Wangyun sneered, "This person's ability isn't bad, but there's a problem with his judgment." A general walked over and asked, "Are you scholars from Imperial College?" Qin Mu nodded his head and said, "Is Lizhu Prefecture young magistrate at the front lines? May I trouble you to inform her, just tell her Riverside County Qin Mu request for a meeting." That general was astonished and didn't dare to neglect his words as he hurried away. Not long after, the clanking sounds of armor sounded out and everyone looked towards the source of the sounds. They saw a female general clad in armor walking over with a helmet under her underarm. She had a heroic look and her facial features were also extremely beautiful. Her face powder, eyebrow liner, and red lips were unforgettable. She should have just come back from the battlefield and there were still bloodstains on her body. "So it's little brother Qin Mu." Yu Yuan Chu's gaze fell on Qin Mu and her eyes lighted up. "The little brother who walked out of Riverside County a few months ago has made a name for himself. I've heard my elder brother mentioning about you and now you're considered to have stood above others. I'm also happy for you. Big sister, you flatter me." Qin Mu blushed with shame and said, "I didn't tell big sister before that I was actually from Great Ruins." Yu Yuan Chu said, "When you had left, I was still thinking when there was a Qin family in Riverside County which could groom such an outstanding child. My elder brother sent a letter over and mentioned you later, and only then I knew you were from Great Ruins." Yun Qiu, Yu Qinghong, and the rest were secretly astonished. Lizhu Prefecture was the place of lodging for all imperial scholars that came out for experience. Never did they expect that Qin Mu was actually well acquainted with Lizhu Prefecture young magistrate. Being the high official of such a place, she was already the commander of the borders. In addition to that, Yu Yuan Chu had an extraordinary background. She was the princess of Yu Yuan Empire back then and the other crown prince of Yu Yuan Empire was Yu Yuan Chu who had become the great general in the capital city. Qin Mu was clearly the abandoned person of Great Ruins. How did he get affiliated with Yu Yuan Chu? "Big sister Chu, what happened to Corpse Immortal Cult?" Qin Mu asked. "Corpse Immortal Cult has already been eradicated by me, but there are still some remnants that have escaped to the southern borders. Yu Yuan Chu brought them to the city walls and said, the rebel army from everywhere have already gathered in the southern borders. There are also rebel sects from everywhere. All sorts of forces meet and mingle together here. The troops get stationed in all the cities along the river and are taking strict precaution. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg and the current situation doesn't look good." Tip of the iceberg, everyone was stunned for a moment. Yu Yuan Chu smiled, "In the world today, Do you know who is loyal and who is a traitor? For example me, I'm the princess of the vanquished Yu Yuan Empire. How would you know that I would not rebel the next moment? Chen Wanyan and the rest broke out in cold sweat, afraid that this heroic-looking female general would kill them in the next instant and announce that she would rebel. Yu Yuan Chu said indifferently, Imperial Court's relation to the old generations is too close. Imperial Preceptor wants to create a brand new generation on top of this foundation, but all he could use were always the power of the old generation. His new generation could not break free from the influence of the old generation, therefore who knows which sect or which official would rebel next? Monk Yun Q asked while shivering, but Lord Magistrate won't rebel, am I right? Yu Yuan Chu looked at him and gave a bone-chilling smile as she said softly, you can make a guess. If you're right, you cannot die. Yun Q turned ashen-faced as he was scared witless. Yu Yuan Chu, this commander had nurtured a great grandeur around her. Even though she was a woman, a cold expression could crush a person with terror. Yu Yuan Chu gave a gentle laugh and summoned a general over. After giving her instructions, the general immediately deployed an army with about 1,000 men. Yu Yuan Chu walked down the city halls and strode onto the river surface. Behind her, 1,000 soldiers also strode over and stepped on the river surface as they moved to the opposite shore. Qin Mu caught up with her and stood on the river surface. Vital chi burst forth under his feet, which held him up stably as he smiled, Big sister, don't scare him. Chen Wanyan and the rest also hurried over and executed their own vital chi to let themselves not sink into the water. They could sprint on water, but to walk calmly on water, it was slightly strenuous. Other than controlling the water, they also needed to have a dense cultivation. Yu Yuan Chu was slightly interested, little brother think I won't rebel against the Imperial Court? Qin Mu shook his head, because this rebellion is a setup by Imperial Preceptor to purge the Imperial Court and the ordinary people. Big Sister is a wise person and could see that very clearly. If Big Sister was dumb, you would have rebelled long ago and not wait until today. Yu Yuan Chu smiled, you're right and also wrong. The reason why I didn't rebel is not that I was clever enough. There were quite a number of people who came forward and urged me to rebel. They were all full of confidence when they came over, thinking they would definitely make me rebel. However, they were all wrong. My Yu Yuan family doesn't value our royal position, we value our people of Yu Yuan. When Yu Yuan Empire was still around back then, Eternal Peace Empire had already become great and they could wage a war over any time. My father knew if a war was to break out, the empire would definitely be ruined and the families would be torn apart. However, Imperial Preceptor came to Yu Yuan and discussed the path with my father. Back then, all the civil and military officials were there and what they discussed was how to govern an empire and their people. My brother and I were also at the Imperial Court. Then, we lost. Her expression remained calm as she said, we suffered a crushing defeat, which we accepted wholeheartedly, of the debate on the path of governing an empire and the path of people's welfare. My father relinquished the title of the emperor and allowed my elder brother to succeed him, but my elder brother didn't accept it and passed the title to me. She gave a smile. No now knew if she was mocking herself or if it was a genuine smile. I had told Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, I'm inferior to you in governing an empire and I'm also inferior to you in looking after the people's welfare. In that case, I'll hand Yu Yuan Empire to you. If your governance and people's welfare is not to my satisfaction, I will rebel against you in the future. Imperial Preceptor agreed and let me govern Yu Yuan, which is also the current Liz Hu. So that's how it is, everyone suddenly realized. Hu Linga cried out astonishingly, Sister, so you were actually a female emperor. Yu Yuan Chu smiled and said, being a female emperor for a day, I can tell you, that's no fun. If you want to be an emperor, you can just find any place and proclaim yourself as the emperor. The only problem is how many people you can have jurisdiction over. She looked at the billowing smoke and fire on the river surface and retracted her gaze. She then smiled as she looked at Chen Wanyan and the rest, it's your fortune you guys are able to follow little brother. His abilities are very extraordinary. Yu Qinghong and Yun Q looked at each other and didn't know how this female general saw Qin Mu's abilities as extraordinary. Yu Yuan Chu remembered the time when she had discovered the red corpse beetle scattered throughout the entire mountain at the north of Tiger Sun County. Other than the red corpse beetles, there was also a skeleton which had its flesh and blood melted away, leaving only the bones and the clothes. From the clothes, she could determine that it was an expert of corpse immortal cult. Even though she couldn't see who this expert of corpse immortal cult was, from the method of controlling the corpse beetles and amount of corpse beetles, that expert's cultivation had probably already reached 7 stars realm. Corpse immortal cult was proficient in corpses and poison, thus their cultivation realm was not that high. But when one clashed with corpse immortal cult, even people with a higher cultivation and battle prowess than them would find it very hard to defeat them. Yet this expert of corpse immortal cult had died from being poisoned, and the one that poisoned him would have been this little brother beside her who looked honest and naive. Back then, this little brother had even deceived her, making her write a travel permit for him and recommended him to go to the capital city. In Yu Yuan Chu's heart, for Chen Wanyun and the rest to be able to follow such a crafty fellow out for experience, they would be even safer than if they had followed the directorates, therefore she had said it was the fortune of Chen Wanyun and the rest. When they reached the opposite shore, the buildings in this city on the opposite shore had already collapsed, killing God knows how many people. Yu Yuan Chu led the army into the city and said, "Just now I said this was just the tip of the iceberg. There is still another reason other than that. Look at this, taking down Deer County was a walk in the park. We easily invaded and took over this place, so aren't the rebel army a little too weak?" Qin Mu was slightly stunned, enticing the enemies to enter deeply. This is not only enticing the enemies to enter, the old foxes haven't even made their moves. Yu Yuan Chu's gaze flickered, the 3 old monsters that injured Imperial Preceptor still haven't appeared. The old monsters of the old generation might not just be the 3 of them. There are Passion-Parting Palace Master Qiu Ji, the 3 Castle Lords of 3 Wonders Castle, high officials that have rebelled, Dragon King of Dragon Rider sect, and as well as other strong practitioners of the cult master level, and none of them have appeared yet. Other big and small cult masters, sect masters, all very quiet. Furthermore, she said in a low voice, who knows if there are any gods that had survived from the old generation? Qin Mu gave a few cold shudders. Chen Wanyun and the rest also felt their blood run cold. Yu Yuan Chu obviously knew many things about the old generation, but she didn't delve into details. You guys can be at ease, these old monsters wouldn't easily make their move on the younger generation like you. Their target is Imperial Preceptor and the first-ranking high officials of the Imperial Court. Deer County was seized by a sect not much bigger than Corpse Immortal Cult, which is called Nine Spectres Sect. Now that the rebellion in Deer County has just been quelled, and there are still some remnants from Nine Spectres Sect escaping, I'll give you an easy task: eradicate all of the remnants. Her gaze shone brightly as it landed on Qin Mu and the rest. Nine Spectres Sect is proficient in dressing up as God and playing the devil. They say they could invite supernatural beings forward to assist them in battle, therefore, you guys have to make some preparations. When the other scholars are here, you guys will go forward to eradicate them. Proficient in dressing up as God and playing the devil? Can invite supernatural beings forward to assist them in battle. Qin Mu was slightly stunned, and he suddenly thought of Soul Guide and Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command. These 2 spells were spells that were related to souls and supernatural beings which were found by him on the first level of floor of Heavenly Records. Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command was from Great Mountain Sect, and as for Soul Guide, it was from Nine Spectres Sect. These 2 spells were placed in the first level of floor of Heavenly Records because there were lesser people who would cultivate spells that deviated from the average. They were spells that belonged to the soul category, yet they didn't have much offensive power. Especially for Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command, this spell declared that it could dispatch ghost gods, yet when Qin Mu tried it a few times, it was at the most similar to the 5 ghosts transfer technique. However, it was much complicated. When Qin Mu found these 2 spells, he had once made Chancellor Ba Shan give him pointers. However, Chancellor Ba Shan also despised these 2 unpopular spells and didn't study them before, therefore he had thrown them back to him and told him to comprehend them himself. Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command might be similar to 5 Ghosts Transfer technique, but the runes were obviously much more complicated and required one to refine a talisman treasure. This talisman treasure was much more complicated than the one Qin Mu saw in Roland's Golden Palace. It was a completely different sphere and had 1024 irregular surfaces. On each surface had a complicated rune. Meanwhile, Roland's Golden Palace's talisman treasure only had 14 surfaces. It was exactly because Qin Mu saw the runes in Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command being complicated, he had thought this divine art was very powerful. Never did he expect its effect was only equivalent to 5 Ghosts transfer technique. He felt that Great Mountain sect might have somewhat concealed the technique, however, this sect had vanished from this world and no longer existed. Meanwhile, Qin Mu had also cultivated Soul Guide from 9 Spectres sect, but he had not tried out if he could succeed in guiding the souls of the dead back from the netherworld. The 2 spells had some runes that were similar and both of them should be spells related to the soul category. Qin Mu bought some yellow joss paper, cinnabar, and spent 2 days to create Talisman Treasure for Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command before spending another day to write down the runes needed for Soul Guide as well, comparing them both together. Comparing them with each other, Qin Mu finally could confirm that both Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command had mistakes. There were some runes among them that were purposely written wrongly. These sects were not willing to hand the spells of their own sects to the imperial court, therefore, they had purposely written a few runes wrongly, lowering the power of the spell drastically or even making it unusable. The runes for Ghost Transferring God Dispatching Runes command needed an extremely high amount of runes, so even when there were over a dozen mistakes, there were still over 1,000 correct runes. This was a huge treasure vault of knowledge. With this knowledge, Qin Mu could fix the wrong runes in Soul Guide. There were over 600 types of rune arrangements the Soul Guide required, and Qin Mu fixed the wrong runes that he had spotted. When he found that there was no mistake anymore, he immediately called a soldier over to ask, "There are corpses in the city. I would like to test my spell." That soldier asked, "Lord requires the corpses of 9 Spectres sect to test your spell?" The corpses of 9 Spectres sect were all buried, so if you need them, they'll have to be dug up. Qin Mu's face changed slightly and hurriedly asked, "Where were they buried?" That soldier replied, "We buried some in the disorderly burial mounds beside Riverside County and the others were buried in Deer Mountain beside Deer County. We just buried the corpses that we fished out a few days ago at wherever that was close." Qin Mu's mind pounded and he hurriedly said, "Where's the young magistrate? Quickly inform the young magistrate and let her order the whole army to be on guard before sending soldiers to the disorderly burial mounds and Deer Mountain to burn the corpses." The soldier didn't understand what he meant, but he still ran out in a hurry while shouting, "Young magistrate had gone over to Riverside County at the opposite shore to suit the people. I'll head over right now to inform her. Big Sister Chuyu is at Riverside County? This is bad." Qin Mu summoned another soldier over and told him to inform the guards to be on alert before immediately finding Chen Wanyun, Yu Qinghong and the rest, and told them quickly, 9 Spectres sect might be making a comeback, quickly be on alert. Chen Wanyun, Yu Qinghong and the rest were all beyond bewildered. Monk Yun Q asked, "The people of 9 Spectres sect are almost all eradicated and only a few people are left escaping for their lives. Why do we have to guard against these few people? They are faking their death." Just as Qin Mu said that, suddenly, a faint singing came from the river surface. This singing voice sounded ancient and obscure, as if it was a god of the netherworld summoning the souls of the dead back. It gave people the feeling that a hazy and imposing god had opened the gate to the other world, sending the souls of the dead back from the netherworld. Qin Mu's face changed hugely and his footsteps sprinted like he was flying as he broke through the air, landing on the north gate of the city tower. The north gate of the city was empty and there were only a few soldiers patrolling. Lishu Prefecture's huge army had just experienced a huge battle, therefore, most of them were nursing themselves. Qin Mu looked towards the river surface and only saw a daoist with a straw hat standing on a ship's mast in the center of surging river. He was currently casting spells and singing on the river, and a huge rune gave off a green glow as if there were numerous green snakes wiggling in the sky. Yun Q and the rest came running over and stood beside Qin Mu to look towards the river surface. Chen Wanyun asked, "What is happening?" Before he could even finish his words, he fell into a daze when he saw black fog surging over from the river. The area which the black fog had shrouded became larger and larger, wider and wider. Among the darkness, a towering gate could be seen at the heart of the river, floating above the water. In the blink of an eye, the sky turned dark. Qin Mu looked towards the opposite shore and could faintly see a few ships that were ferrying the scholars sailed over. He then saw the darkness shrouded the scholars' ships. There was also a scholar's ship which had reached the sky above surging river, which was also shrouded by the darkness. Shouts of anger and cries of astonishment sounded out from the ship, making it obvious they had met something unexpected weird. He turned his head towards Deer Mountain on the left of Riverside County. Riverside County suddenly burst open as small figures rushed into the midair, pouncing towards their location. The few soldiers who were guarding the west city gate of Deer County couldn't react in time and were fixed in place by the yellow talismans used from the few figures that came flying over, slaughtering them on the spot. Boom! The west city gate blew wide open and the corpses rushed into the county city, slaughtering the guards who had yet reorganized themselves. These corpses were indeed corpses, but the corpses still had the souls of the dead. The Daoist on the river cast a spell and used Soul Guide to summon the souls of all the dead people in Nine Spectres sect, allow their souls to return to their body and commence a sudden attack on the guards of Deer County. These corpses were all worn out. There were some that only had a piece of skin attaching their heads to their bodies, while some had a huge hole opened up in their chests. Some were missing their limbs and they all looked terrifyingly sinister. They were indeed dead, but their souls were pulled back from the netherworld and returned to their bodies, thus their abilities were still the same as if they were alive. Even Chen Wanyan was stunned at this sight as he stood on the city tower not knowing what to do. Qin Mu looked towards Riverside County on the opposite shore, which was already shrouded by the black fog. Only the explosions of divine arts could be faintly heard. Abandon the city, we'll head to the east gate. Qin Mu made his decision. Chen Wanyan and the rest jolted back to their senses and Qin Mu sprinted along the city walls while shouting for the dragon Chelin and Hulinga to return. Turmoil had already broken out in Deer County City as everyone was caught unprepared and got killed by those corpses that were revived by Nine Spectres sect. The Army of Eternal Peace Empire was used to cultivate skills of combined assault. By cultivating the same spell or sword skill, 10 or more soldiers would just need to group up and work together closely for them to be able to even kill opponents a realm higher than them. These kind of battle techniques were extremely useful in a large-scale battle, which could be said that killing enemies was as easy as smashing rotten wood, resulting in an utter defeat for the sects which dared to resist. However, this battle in Deer County City also exhibited the disadvantages of this battle technique. Nine Spectres sect revived corpses to slaughter their way in the city, scattering these soldiers before they could organize themselves. Fighting on their own, the ability of these soldiers was much inferior to the disciples of the sects in the martial world, thus it was almost a one-sided massacre. The sky turned darker and darker. After these disciples of Nine Spectres sect were revived, the darkness was like daylight to them. They could see everything clearly and they were not afraid of death. They were originally corpses, thus they couldn't feel any pain and had no need to defend against the opponent's move. They could just pounce over and kill people directly. Furthermore, Nine Spectres sect as a sect, there was no lack of experts. Even the strong practitioners of Celestial Being Realm and Life and Death Realm were also revived. This kind of reviving wasn't a real reviving and was just using spells to summon the souls of the dead back. These souls of the dead would still have to return to Netherworld, but in this period of time, it was enough for them to sweep away all the guards in Deer County. The guards of Deer County are finished. Qin Mu's heart sunken when he saw Hulinga and the dragon Chelin rushing over, only then did he let out a sigh of relief. Everyone immediately jumped off the East City Gate and ran away from the city in the darkness. Behind, the East City Gate suddenly collapsed as it got shattered into pieces by the strong practitioners of Celestial Being Realm. Qin Mu turned his head to look back and saw a general of Celestial Being Realm being torn apart by a few strong practitioners of Nine Spectres sect that got revived. There were still a few Taoists that were executing the yellow joss papers and walking in the sky. This made Qin Mu's heart sink. These few Taoists were the remnants of Corpse Immortal Cult. With the alliance of Corpse Immortal Cult and Nine Spectres sect, one of them would control corpses while the other would control souls. There probably wouldn't be much soldiers in the city left. Academician Qin, we should cross the river and return to Riverside County, Chen Wanyan said solemnly. Qin Mu shook his head, there are also quite a lot of corpses sunk in the river. We can't return. Just as he said that, sounds of water traveled over from the riverside. Among the black-colored fog, the revived corpses walked ashore from the bottom of the river with water dripping off their bodies. When they saw them, they suddenly sprinted towards here. We can only head to southern borders and look for the chance to return to the north. Qin Mu had no change in expression as he raised his hand to pat his waist. A sword light flew out from Tao Tie's sack and transformed into wave sword form. With the sword light revolving, it severed the heads of the 9 Spectres' sect's disciples. The few 9 Spectres' sect's disciples became headless zombies. They immediately bent over and picked up their heads, clasping them under their armpits and continued to rush over. A head under the armpit of the corpse opened his mouth and shouted with a sharp voice, "Come quickly, there are some that have slipped through the net. Come quickly." Even though Yun Qiu, Yu Qinghong, and Chen Wanyun were quite knowledgeable and seen a lot, they had never seen such a sinister spell before. On the other hand, Cai Yunxiang, who was always shy and timid, was calm and composed. She was not the slightest afraid. Qin Mu spread his 5 fingers and gave a sudden squeeze. The sword light of Junior Protector Sword immediately turned into spiral sword form. The sword spun and sliced the disciples of 9 Spectres' sect into pieces as he warned solemnly, "Move quickly, in case the experts of 9 Spectres' sect catches up." The few of them quickly sprinted towards the darkness. Yun Qiu looked at the flames surrounding Deer County and felt slight fear and dismal in his heart. To the southern borders? That's the nest of the enemies. The black fog grew denser and denser. It was daytime, yet it looked like the night. Qin Mu and the rest could still roughly determine the direction. When they raised their heads up to the sky, they could still see the sun, but the sun wasn't harsh to their eyes. It was like a faint circular halo that was much dimmer than the moonlight. Looking around their surrounding, they could only see the green mountain turning into a hazy black mountain. Noisy voices came from behind as someone shouted, "There are a few that escaped. There are 3 males and 3 females, and also a huge lion. Don't go away, pick up my head. Come back quickly." Qin Mu's heart moved slightly and he looked towards Chen Wanyun. Chen Wanyun understood his intention and his flying sword flew out of his sheath to dig a long hole in the ground for him to lie down. It was the first time he had met such a weird incident of the dead reviving, therefore, he was slightly at a loss, but now he had already calmed down. Qin Mu waved his sleeves and swept up the earth on both sides, burying Chen Wanyun under the earth. The rest of them continued walking forward and they didn't move much further when they heard miserable shrieks coming from their back. "Someone hid in the earth to ambush us. My head is severed, does anyone see my head?" "Shut up, idiot. If your head is missing, how are you talking?" "So I see. No wonder I couldn't find it for so long. Which senior brother saw my leg? Sorry to trouble you, much thanks." Qin Mu made the dragon Chilean stop and Chen Wanyun immediately caught up. There shouldn't be any more pursuers. Let us go quickly. Suddenly, singing voices faintly sounded out from the fog, and these songs were even more peculiar than the song coming from the river surface. These songs had no cadence and sounded very monotonous. Qin Mu made them stop for a moment while he sneaked over and saw the few singers that were singing. They were a few corpses, singing and casting spells, executing soul guide in the dark forest. Their bodies were tattered and they looked very strange, casting spells in the darkness. Dead people casting spells? Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He suddenly thought of the divine art of 9 Spectres sect and felt that they had the flavor of breaking through the boundary of life and death. If this kind of divine art was researched to its limit, could it break the boundary between life and death and achieve eternal life? The divine arts of 9 Spectres sect were far from being called eternal life now. They were only guiding the souls of the dead back from the netherworld, to allow the souls to reside in their own bodies temporarily. They had to continue to execute soul guide, and if they stopped executing soul guide, their souls might probably be dragged back to the netherworld and they would really die. No wonder those corpses are also executing soul guide. Qin Mu thought to himself, they must execute soul guide continuously for them to be able to continue moving. These dead men are not weak in cultivation, therefore, it's still best to avoid them. He left these dead people alone and sneaked back. Let us change a direction. They didn't move much further when they met another group of 9 Spectres sect disciples that were casting spells. Other than these 9 Spectres sect disciples that were already dead, he also saw a few disciples of Corpse Immortal cult that were also controlling corpses to surround the soldiers that were escaping from the city. The flying zombies flew by walking on the yellow joss papers beneath their feet. Qin Mu frowned and changed another direction. Let us head to Deer Mountain. The corpses of 9 Spectres sect were buried there and they slaughtered their way to the county city from there, therefore it must be empty over there. Everyone was extremely nervous as the people of 9 Spectres sect and Corpse Immortal cult were now everywhere in the black fog. Since Corpse Immortal cult was eradicated by Yu Yuan Chu, he reckoned the cult disciples' corpses were also buried nearby, allowing 9 Spectres sect to revive them as well. It was obvious that 9 Spectres sect had come prepared, catching Yu Yuan Chu off guard. If this situation went on, Liz Hu would probably be in danger. Qin Mu thought to himself, there must definitely be a ruthless fellow behind the scenes in 9 Spectres sect. For victory, he could even sacrifice the lives of so many disciples of 9 Spectres sect unscrupulously. They came to Deer Mountain and there was indeed no one here. The black fog had also faded quite a bit. Chen Wenyun, Yun Q and the rest gradually put their hearts down. As long as they crossed this mountain and left the area shrouded by the black fog, they would be temporarily safe. Suddenly, a cadence chant sounded from the mountain. Everyone's heart turned anxious again and they looked towards Qin Mu. Qin Mu frowned slightly and whispered, something's wrong with his chanting. This isn't Soul Guide and is another kind of spell. Yu Qinghong and the rest couldn't hear the difference. They didn't know much about Soul Guide of 9 Spectres sect while Qin Mu had studied this divine art before, thus he could hear some disparity from the chants. You guys stay here, I'll go and have a look. Qin Mu instructed them and approached the chanting silently. When he came near to the chantings, Qin Mu's footsteps became even softer. On the mountain col in front of him, he could see a sacrificial altar and there were over 10 male and female Taoists casting spells on the sacrificial altar. That sacrificial altar was constructed by skeletons. The length and width were the same, each being 13 yards long. Meanwhile, on the altar, skulls were used to create a flat surface. With a wide banner erected at the 4 corners, north, south, east, west. Runes written in cinnabar mixed with blood were on the white banners. A sculpture of an 8-armed devil god was erected on the center of the sacrificial altar. This sculpture squatted with one single leg while the other leg wrapped the previous one around the back of its calf. With the palms of the 8 arms clasped together, the devil god had 4 faces and each face had 3 eyes. These male and female Taoists each executed a talisman treasure and the talisman treasures floated in the air. The talisman had numerous surfaces and on each surface was a rune. With these Taoists chant, the runes on the talisman treasures lighted up continuously. The runes that lighted up shone precisely on the body of the devil god's sculpture. Whenever a place got shone on, a rune would light up on the devil god's sculpture. The talisman treasure continuously spun and lighted up the runes on the sculpture one after another. At this moment, more than half of the runes on this devil god's sculpture had been lighted up. Ghost transferring god dispatching runes command. Qin Mu's heart trembled slightly, the spells of Great Mountain Sect. They are the disciples of Great Mountain Sect which was already exterminated. These dozen male and female Taoists were all divine arts practitioners and it looked like that they had already been executing ghost transferring god dispatching runes command for quite some time. It was obvious that after Great Mountain Sect was exterminated, they had conspired to strike back, allying themselves with 9 Spectres sect and Corpse Immortal cult. Qin Mu then took the time which 9 Spectres sect rose up in revolt into consideration and found it was precisely the time when the scholars of Imperial College were just arriving at Lishu and Deer County. This meant that there was someone who had clearly kept tabs on the movement of the scholars of Imperial College and even the time the Imperial scholars would reach here. The scholars of Imperial College coming out for experience were all elites chosen from their own realms. These scholars would become the future officials of Eternal Peace Empire, taking over the current batch of officials that had come from each and every sect. The current officials mostly belonged to the older generation while the Imperial scholars were the new generation. If this batch of scholars was to be entirely eradicated, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor would lose a pillar of strength in his new generation. This time the scholars coming out for experience was a decree by the emperor, and those who knew this beforehand would only be the first-ranking high officials who held high authority other than Ji Yulinwan. Qin Mu's gaze flickered. Among the first-ranking powerful ministers, there were definitely people who had betrayed. He very much wanted to continue watching how these disciples of Great Mountain Sect summoned the Devil God, but if he waited until the Devil God was summoned, their deaths would probably be due. Qin Mu sneaked back silently and described what he had seen to Chen Wanyun and the rest. 13 divine arts practitioners, and their abilities aren't weak. If they bring out the Devil God, none of us will be able to escape. We'll have to eliminate them before they bring out the Devil God and destroy the sacrificial altar. Who dares to follow me to kill them? Kill divine arts practitioners? Yun Q and Yu Qinghong were both astonished, and 13 of them. Qin Mu gave them a glance. You guys don't dare. Yun Q muttered, I felt a little afraid. They are divine arts practitioners, and furthermore, there are 13 of them. Qin Mu replied solemnly, if we don't kill them, when they bring out the Devil God, not only will we die, the entire Lisu would be destroyed. Chen Wanyun muttered to himself irresolutely and asked, is Great Mountain Sect a spell sect? Sai Yunxiang tightened the sword case on her back and said, I've heard my elders mention before that Great Mountain Sect was a sect that was proficient in cultivating spells related to souls. They aren't as proficient in sword skills or battle techniques. Back then, when Imperial Preceptor exterminated Great Mountain Sect, he brought a team of divine arts practitioners that cultivated sword skill to attack Great Mountain, exterminating this sect. After Great Mountain Sect got exterminated, their disciples that were scattered outside might not learn the traditional spells and won't have many attainments in their battle techniques and sword skills. Qin Mu said, Imperial Preceptor used sword skills to kill them, but we won't use sword skills, we'll use battle techniques. If we use sword skills, we won't win their spells. But in close combat, before they could even execute their spells, they would be slain by us. Wanyun, Yun Q, Qinghong, I've seen your battle techniques before and they aren't weak. Do you have the guts to face them? Chen Wanyun replied solemnly, you dare, I dare. Qin Mu looked at Sai Yunxiang, and Sai Yunxiang lowered her head while saying, Yunxiang will take Imperial Academician as my only guide. Qin Mu then looked at Yu Qinghong, and her eyes were sparkling as she found it hard to suppress her excitement. I had never come to grips with such a situation before. How can I not participate? Wolf Slave, get ready as well. Qin Mu's gaze fell on Monk Yun Q, and he hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth. If I don't enter hell, who would? I'm in. Qin Mu said, I will be the first to rush out later and slaughter my way up to the sacrificial altar to pave the way for you guys. You guys will follow behind me and fight in close combat. We'll have to fight as quick as possible and cannot drag the battle out. The sacrificial is only 13 by 13 yards. With such cramped space, you guys will have to think what move you want to use and go through it several times in your mind. Yu Qinghong was so excited both her hands were trembling as she smiled. Following you isn't so bad after all. The first battle is already so exciting, I already can't wait. Qin Mu stooped down and moved forward. Chen Wanyun and the rest followed him and came to the mountain kernel. They could see that the runes on the body of Devil God's sculpture were almost all lit up. The 13 female and male Taoists were still executing their talisman as they continued walking around the sacrificial altar. The chants came out continuously from their mouth as if it was an ancient sacrificial language. Qin Mu's heart jumped and he suppressed his urge to immediately rush out and break the sacrificial ritual. He instructed softly, observe the terrain, and after you guys are done, we'll make our move. Linga, bring the dragon Chileen to the other side and make some sounds to attract their attention. Hu Linga immediately brought the dragon Chileen to take a detour around the sacrificial altar and went towards the right. After a moment, Yu Qinghong said softly, we are done observing. Qin Mu waved his hand and Hu Linga immediately jumped out from the underbrush while the dragon Chileen roared behind her and gave chase as if he was hunting. The 13 Taoists on the sacrificial altar were astonished, but when they saw the fox and the dragon Chileen, the Taoist smiled, so it was a huge lion catching its prey. Before he could even finish his words, he saw a knife light flashed by. Qin Mu had already arrived at the sacrificial altar with each hand wielding a knife. The human head rolled down as he raised his hand. Battle technique: every cloud has a silver lining. This video will end here.